Billionaire asks Black Waitress for financial advice as a joke. But her first words left him shocked. The boardroom on the 42nd floor of Ward Capital was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the quiet shuffle of papers. 20 executives sat around the polished mahogany table, their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. At the head of the table sat Julian Ward, Billionaire CEO, his expression unreadable, and standing at the presentation screen, armed with nothing but a laser pointer and absolute confidence, was a 26-year-old black woman in a tailored blazer that she'd bought on sale 3 days ago. Keisha Williams clicked to the next slide, and the room's tension ratcheted up another notch. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice calm and clear, "the reason Ward Capital has lost $47 million in the last 6 months isn't market volatility. It's incompetence masked as strategy." A board member, Richard, silver-haired and self-important, cleared his throat aggressively. "Ms. Williams, with all due respect, you've been in this building for exactly 2 weeks. Perhaps you should—" "Let her finish," Julian said quietly. But the authority in his voice was absolute. Keisha didn't miss a beat. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a detailed breakdown of the company's recent investments. "You've invested heavily in 3 tech startups that anyone with basic due diligence would have flagged as overvalued. You ignored the fundamentals because the founders went to the right schools and said the right things at the right cocktail parties." Another executive, Thomas, leaned forward. "Those investments were vetted by our entire analysis team." "Then your entire analysis team is either incompetent or afraid to tell you the truth," Keisha said. "Probably both." The room exploded into murmurs. Julian's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Because 3 weeks ago, Keisha Williams had been serving him pancakes at a diner, and now she was the only person in this room telling him the truth. But to understand how a waitress ended up here, standing in front of some of the most powerful men in finance, telling them exactly why they were failing, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to the moment when Julian Ward walked into Mel's diner on a Tuesday morning, exhausted and desperate, and asked a question that would change both of their lives forever. Before we go deeper into this story, I want you to do something for me. Wherever you're watching from right now, whether you're at home in Chicago, on your lunch break in New York, or relaxing in London, drop a comment and tell me where you are and what time it is. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear isn't just about one woman's rise from waitress to executive. It's about every person who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed because of where they came from instead of what they knew. It's about the brilliance that exists in places powerful people never bother to look. Now let me take you back to where this really started. Keisha Williams woke up at 5:30 on Tuesday morning to the sound of her mother coughing in the next room. She lay still for a moment, listening, counting the coughs, 1, 2, 3, 4, waiting to see if it would escalate into something that required intervention. At 7 coughs, she'd get up and check. At 10, she'd grab the inhaler. The coughing stopped at 6. Keisha exhaled and stared at the ceiling of her tiny bedroom, in the apartment she shared with her mother in South Brooklyn. The ceiling had a water stain that looked like a map of some country she'd never visit. She'd been staring at that stain for 3 years, ever since her father died, and their life had collapsed into this smaller, harder version of itself. Marcus Williams had been a good man, a bus driver who worked overtime to make sure his daughter could go to college. He'd had a heart attack at 49, behind the wheel of his bus, and died before the paramedics arrived. No life insurance, he'd let it lapse to pay for Keisha's textbooks. The medical bills and funeral costs had buried the family in debt that Keisha was still climbing out from under. Her mother, Gloria, had never been the same. The grief had triggered a spiral of health problems. Diabetes that went from manageable to severe, high blood pressure, complications that required expensive medications and frequent doctor visits. At 23, Keisha had dropped out of her accounting program at NYU with 1 year left, taken 2 jobs, and become her mother's primary caretaker. That was 3 years ago. She was 26 now, and the plan was still the same. Survive, save money, eventually finish her degree, maybe, someday, become the financial analyst she'd always dreamed of being. But dreams didn't pay for insulin. Dreams didn't cover rent. Dreams didn't keep the electricity on. So Keisha worked. She showered quickly, dressed in the black pants and white button-down shirt that constituted her uniform at Mel's Diner, and pulled her hair back into a neat bun. In the kitchen, she prepared her mother's morning medications, 4 pills that had to be taken with food, 2 that had to be taken on an empty stomach, and left them on the counter with a note and a glass of water. Morning, Mama. Took breakfast shift. Be home at 3. Doctor appointment at 4:30. Don't forget. Love you. She grabbed her backpack, heavy with textbooks for the night classes she was taking at the community college, and headed out into the pre-dawn darkness of Brooklyn. The subway ride to the diner took 40 minutes. Keisha spent the time reviewing financial statements for her corporate finance class. She was studying a case about a tech company that had collapsed despite years of profitability, trying to identify the warning signs that analysts had missed. She made notes in the margins, her mind working through the numbers with the ease of someone who thought in spreadsheets and profit margins. This was where Keisha came alive, not in the diner, serving coffee and remembering how people liked their eggs, but here, in the world of numbers and patterns and financial puzzles that most people found boring. She could look at a balance sheet and see the story it was telling, not just what was happening, but what was about to happen. She could spot problems before they became disasters, identify opportunities that others missed. It was a gift, a talent she'd inherited from her father, who'd always been good with money, despite never having much of it. Numbers don't lie, baby girl, he used to say. People lie, marketing lies, but if you know how to read numbers, they'll tell you the truth every time. Keisha had built on that foundation, teaching herself advanced financial analysis through library books and free online courses. She helped neighbors with their taxes, created budgets for friends trying to get out of debt, analyzed investment opportunities for her cousin who'd gotten a small inheritance. She did it all for free, because she loved it, and because the people in her community couldn't afford to pay for financial advice. But in the world that mattered, the world of corporate finance and investment firms, Keisha Williams was invisible. Just another black girl from Brooklyn, working 2 jobs to survive. Nobody looked at a waitress and saw a financial genius. Nobody except, apparently, Julian Ward. Though Keisha didn't know that yet. She arrived at Mel's Diner at 6:15, 15 minutes early as always. The place was a classic American diner. Red leather booths, checkered floor, a long counter with spinning stools, and a jukebox that still played actual vinyl. It had been there for 40 years, serving the same menu of breakfast classics and strong coffee to a rotating cast of regulars and tourists. Keisha tied on her apron, poured herself a cup of coffee, and prepared for the morning rush. Tuesday mornings were busy, people stopping in before work, construction crews grabbing food before heading to job sites, the occasional businessman who'd wandered in from Manhattan looking for something more authentic than a Starbucks. By 7:30, the diner was full. Keisha moved through her section with practiced efficiency, taking orders, delivering food, refilling coffee, clearing tables. She smiled at customers, made small talk about the weather, and collected her tips with quiet gratitude. She was good at this job, not because she loved it, but because she understood that every job, no matter how menial others thought it was, deserved to be done well. Her father had taught her that too. At 8:15, a man walked in and sat at table 9 in her section. Keisha noticed him immediately because he didn't fit. He was wearing an expensive suit, the kind that probably cost more than she made in a month, but he looked exhausted. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly mussed, like he'd been running his hands through it. He carried himself with the posture of someone important, but his eyes had the hollow look of someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. He sat in the booth, picked up the menu, and stared at it without really seeing it. Keisha approached with her notepad and her professional smile. "Good morning, sir. What can I get you?" The man looked up, and for a moment, their eyes met. His were gray-blue, intelligent, and deeply tired. He seemed to study her face for a second, noting something, though Keisha couldn't imagine what. Then, he did something unexpected. He smiled. Not the polite, dismissive smile customers usually gave their servers, but a real smile tinged with something that looked almost like mischief. "Actually," he said, his voice smooth but edged with exhaustion, "I need financial advice. Think you can help me?" It was clearly meant as a joke, a light comment to a waitress he assumed would laugh it off or play along before taking his order. He probably expected her to say something like, "Sure, honey, I can tell you not to order the hash browns," or maybe just giggle and ask what he really wanted for breakfast. Keisha didn't do either of those things. Instead, she looked at him with the same assessing gaze he'd given her. Saw the expensive suit, the exhaustion, the way he held tension in his shoulders. Saw a man with money who was stressed about money, which meant business problems. Saw someone who thought a waitress couldn't possibly have anything useful to say about finance. She could have let it go, should have let it go, laughed politely, taken his order, moved on with her day. But something about his tone, the casual dismissiveness hidden in the joke, irritated her, as if serving food meant she couldn't possibly understand the complexities of his world. So Keisha looked him dead in the eye and said, "Depends. Are you trying to fix a short-term cash flow issue or a deep strategic failure?" The change in the man's face was instantaneous. The tired smile vanished, replaced by shock. His eyes widened. He straightened in his seat. "What?" he said, as if he hadn't heard her correctly. "Financial advice," Keisha said calmly. "That's what you asked for. But the answer depends on what kind of problem you're actually trying to solve. Short-term cash flow problems require different solutions than fundamental strategic failures. So which is it?" The man stared at her. Actually stared, his mouth slightly open, like he'd never been spoken to this way by anyone, let alone a waitress. Keisha waited. She had other tables, other customers, a full section to manage, but something in her wanted to see how he'd respond. He recovered quickly. The shock transformed into something else. Curiosity maybe, or interest. He leaned forward slightly. "All right," he said, and now he wasn't joking at all. "What would you do if your company was losing millions of dollars?" "How many millions?" Keisha asked. "Does it matter?" "Yes." Losing 2 million in a company worth 10 million is a crisis. Losing 2 million in a company worth a billion is a rounding error. Context matters. The man's eyebrows rose. Let's say 40 million in 6 months. Company worth about 3 billion. Keisha did the math instantly. Just over 1% of valuation in 6 months. Concerning but not catastrophic, which meant either the losses were accelerating or there was something structural wrong. Then I'd cut emotional spending disguised as investment, she said. Stop trusting people who tell you what you want to hear instead of what you need to hear, and take a risk on the person you'd normally overlook. The silence that followed was thick. The man stared at her like she'd just spoken a language he didn't know he understood. He stopped, started again. That's very specific advice. You asked for financial advice. I gave it to you. Keisha glanced at her other tables. Now, would you like the breakfast special or just coffee? Wait, he held up a hand. Where did you learn that? About the emotional spending? The advisors? Life, Keisha said simply. Same place, everyone learns everything that actually matters. Now, sir, I really do need to take your order. We're busy this morning. She said it kindly but firmly. And before he could respond, she added, the special is good. Eggs, bacon, toast, hash browns. Coffee's fresh. I'll give you a minute to decide. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the man sitting there staring after her like she'd just performed a magic trick he couldn't figure out. Keisha went to her other tables, took orders, delivered food, and tried not to think about the strange interaction. She'd probably been too bold. Customers didn't like it when servers stepped out of their expected roles. She might get a complaint. But when she came back to table 9, 5 minutes later, the man was still there, and he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I'll take the special, he said. And coffee, black. Coming right up. And, he hesitated. I'm serious about the advice. That thing you said about emotional spending, how do you identify that? Keisha paused. She should walk away, should take his order and leave it at that. But something in his face, genuine curiosity, not condescension, made her answer. You look at where money goes that doesn't generate returns, she said. Fancy offices that don't increase productivity. Executive perks that don't retain talent. Acquisitions made because they look good in press releases instead of because they make financial sense. Investments in things that make you feel innovative instead of things that are actually profitable. It's all emotional, ego, fear, vanity, dressed up as strategy. The man nodded slowly. And the advisors who tell you what you want to hear? They're the ones who never disagree with you, who always have explanations for why your ideas will work and their concerns can be managed, who make you feel smart instead of making you think harder. Keisha glanced around. Her manager was looking at her, signaling that she was spending too long at one table. Look, sir, I really need to get your order in. Of course. Sorry. But as she turned to leave, he said, one more question. That last piece of advice about taking a risk on someone you'd normally overlook, what did you mean? Keisha looked back at him. I meant that the best answers usually come from the places you're not looking, from people who see the problem differently because they're standing in a different place, the people you overlook because they don't have the right credentials or didn't go to the right schools or don't look like what you expect expertise to look like. She met his eyes directly. I meant people like me. Then she walked away for real this time, heading to the kitchen to put in his order. Behind her, Julian Ward, Billionaire CEO of Ward Capital, one of the most successful investment firms in the country, sat in a diner booth and felt like he'd just been hit by a truck. That waitress had just diagnosed his company's problems with more accuracy in 3 minutes than his entire board of advisors had managed in 6 months. And that last line, "People like me," she'd known exactly what she was doing. She'd seen him dismiss her as just a waitress, and she'd called him on it without ever raising her voice or losing her professional composure. Julian ran his hands through his hair and laughed quietly. He couldn't remember the last time someone had surprised him like this, challenged him, made him reconsider assumptions he didn't even know he was making. When Keisha returned with his coffee, he had his phone out. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." "Keisha," she said, setting down the coffee. "Keisha, I'm Julian." He extended his hand. She shook it, her grip firm. "Nice to meet you, Julian." "Keisha, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to believe I'm completely serious. All right? Do you have business cards? A way to contact you outside of this diner?" She laughed, actually laughed, a clear, genuine sound. "Business cards? Sir, I'm a waitress. Why would I have business cards?" "Because you just gave me better financial advice in 5 minutes than the people I pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to advise me, and I'd like to continue this conversation." Keisha's smile faded. She studied his face, looking for the punchline. "You're serious?" "Completely. You don't even know if I know what I'm talking about." "Then test me," Julian said. "Ask me about my company. Tell me what's wrong with it. If you're wrong, I'll finish my breakfast and we'll both forget this conversation ever happened. If you're right..." He paused. "If you're right, I'd like to hire you as a consultant." Keisha stared at him. "You want to hire me based on a 3-minute conversation? I want to see if what you said was luck or insight. So ask me questions. Analyze my business. Prove you know what you're talking about." This was insane. This had to be some kind of elaborate joke, or test, or hidden camera show. Keisha glanced around the diner, half expecting to see cameras, but Julian's expression was completely earnest. "I'm working," Keisha said. "I can't just stand here having an extended conversation with you. What time do you get off?" 3 o'clock. "I'll wait." "That's 6 hours from now." "I know. I'll wait." Julian smiled. "I have nowhere more important to be. And Keisha, I'm very serious about this. Whatever you're being paid here, I'll pay you more. I just need to know if you're the real deal." Keisha opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She looked at this strange man in his expensive suit, sitting in a diner booth, telling her he'd wait 6 hours just to talk to her about finance. "Your breakfast will be out in a few minutes," she said finally, and walked away. Julian watched her go, then pulled up his phone and did what he should have done earlier, Googled the woman he'd just decided to take a chance on. Except there was nothing to Google. Keisha Williams was apparently not on social media, didn't have a LinkedIn profile, and had no online presence whatsoever beyond a mention in a community college honor roll from last semester. Community college, accounting major, dean's list. Julian smiled. Of course she was studying accounting. Of course she was excelling at it. He spent the next 6 hours in that booth, ordering more coffee, eating slowly, working on his laptop, and occasionally watching Keisha move through her shift with efficient grace. He watched her calm a difficult customer, split her tips with a coworker who'd had a bad morning, and help an elderly man who couldn't read the menu without his glasses. And he thought about his company, about the advisors who never challenged him, about the investments made to impress rather than to profit, about the $47 million lost in 6 months because everyone was too busy protecting their own positions to tell him the truth. You look at where money goes, that doesn't generate returns, Keisha had said. She was right. He'd been throwing money at problems, hoping momentum would carry them through. Making acquisitions that looked good in headlines but hadn't been properly vetted. Listening to advisors who told him what he wanted to hear instead of what he needed to hear. And he'd been overlooking people who didn't fit the mold of what he expected expertise to look like. People like the waitress who just diagnosed his company's failures in 3 sentences. At 3 o'clock, Keisha finished her shift, collected her tips, and untied her apron. She'd been hyper-aware of Julian's presence all day, but had forced herself not to think about his offer too much. It was probably nothing. Rich people said things they didn't mean all the time. But when she came out of the back room in her regular clothes, jeans, and a worn NYU sweatshirt, Julian was still there, waiting at the booth. He stood when he saw her. "Hi." "Hi," Keisha said warily. "You actually waited." "I said I would." He gestured to the booth. "Can we talk now?" "I have somewhere to be at 4:30. Doctor's appointment with my mom." "I'll drive you. We can talk on the way." "You'll drive me?" Keisha shook her head. "I don't even know you." "That's fair. How about we talk here for 30 minutes, and then I'll call you a car to your appointment. On me." Keisha hesitated. Every instinct told her this was weird, possibly dangerous, definitely too good to be true. But something in Julian's face, the exhaustion, the genuine curiosity, made her trust him just enough. 30 minutes, she agreed. "And then I'm leaving, whether we're done or not." "Deal." They sat across from each other in the booth. Julian pulled out his phone and opened a document. "This is Ward Capital's financial summary for the last year," he said, turning the phone toward her. "Look at it and tell me what you see." Keisha took the phone. Her eyes scanned the numbers, processing information at a speed that made Julian blink. "You're over-leveraged in tech startups," she said, after 90 seconds. "Specifically, you've got heavy positions in 3 companies that are burning cash faster than they're growing revenue. Here, here, and here." She pointed to line items. "The market valuations are high, but the fundamentals are terrible. High customer acquisition costs, low retention, no clear path to profitability. You're betting on hype, not business models." Julian felt his chest tighten. She was right. Completely right. "What else?" "Your operational costs are high relative to your assets under management. You've got too many people doing overlapping jobs, which means either inefficiency or internal politics protecting redundant positions." She scrolled further. "And your advisory board is expensive, really expensive, but I'd bet they haven't generated a single innovative idea in the last 2 years." "How do you know that?" "Because if they had, you wouldn't be losing money. You'd be ahead of trends, not chasing them." Keisha handed him back the phone. "You've got smart people telling you safe things. That's not advice. That's expensive agreement." Julian sat back. "You got all of that from 90 seconds looking at a financial summary?" "Numbers tell stories if you know how to read them. Your story is that you built something great, got comfortable, surrounded yourself with people who made you feel smart instead of people who made you think harder, and now you're paying for it." Keisha glanced at the time. "I need to leave in 10 minutes. What would you do if you were me?" "Fire half your advisory board. Cut the 3 tech investments before they lose you any more money. Restructure your team to eliminate redundancy. And start looking for opportunities in sectors you've been ignoring because they're not sexy enough for press releases." "Like what?" "Boring businesses that generate steady cash flow, logistics, infrastructure. Things that will never be unicorns but will still be operating 50 years from now because they solve real problems. She stood up. That's what I do. But you're not going to do it. Why not? Because firing your advisors means admitting you were wrong to trust them. Because cutting investments means taking a public loss. Because restructuring means confrontation and discomfort. And because boring businesses don't make you feel like a genius. Keisha slung her backpack over her shoulder. Thanks for the conversation. It was interesting. Wait, Julian stood too. You're right about all of it, which is exactly why I want to hire you. I'm not qualified. You just proved you're more qualified than the people I'm currently paying. I don't have an MBA, I don't have connections, I don't even have a bachelor's degree yet. I don't care about credentials, I care about being right, and you've been right about everything. Julian pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card. Come to my office tomorrow. Look at everything. Give me a full analysis. If I don't agree with your assessment, you walk away. If I do agree, I hire you as a consultant at, let's say, $10,000 for the analysis. Keisha took the card reflexively, her mind spinning. $10,000? That was more than she made in 3 months. This is crazy, she said. Maybe, but you're the first person in 6 months who's told me the truth instead of what I want to hear. That's worth $10,000 to find out if it was luck or if you're actually this good. Keisha looked at the card. Ward Capital. Julian Ward, CEO. A midtown address that meant serious money. I'll think about it, she said finally. That's all I ask. Then, because she was already late, Keisha left the diner and headed toward the subway, her mind racing. Behind her, Julian Ward sat back down in the booth and smiled for the first time in weeks. He'd just found the person who could save his company. He just had to convince her to actually take the job. Have you ever had someone underestimate you completely, only to be shocked when you showed them what you actually knew? Drop a comment and tell me about it. Because that's what just happened to Julian. He walked into a diner expecting pancakes and got a masterclass in humility. If you're invested in seeing where this goes, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next will change both of their lives forever. Keisha didn't go to Ward Capital the next day. She meant to. She woke up Wednesday morning with Julian's business card on her nightstand, stared at it while drinking her coffee, and told herself she'd go right after her shift at the diner. But then her mother had a bad morning. Blood sugar too low, dizzy, nearly fell in the bathroom, and Keisha spent 2 hours making sure she was stable before rushing to work. And after her shift, she had class. And after class, she had her second job at the coffee shop. By the time she got home at 11 p.m., she was too exhausted to think straight, let alone analyze a billionaire's company. Thursday was the same. Friday too. By Saturday, Keisha had almost convinced herself the whole thing had been some weird fever dream. Rich men didn't offer waitresses $10,000 to analyze their businesses. That wasn't how the world worked. Then, on Saturday afternoon, while she was refilling salt shakers at the diner, Julian Ward walked in again. He looked better than he had on Tuesday, more rested, his suit perfectly pressed, his expression alert. He spotted Keisha immediately and headed straight for her section. "You didn't come," he said, without preamble. Keisha set down the salt shaker. "I've been busy." Too busy for $10,000? Too busy trying to survive, actually. Some of us don't have the luxury of dropping everything to consult for billionaires. She said it more sharply than she'd intended. Exhaustion, making her tone harsh. Julian's expression softened. "You're right. I'm sorry. I assumed..." He stopped. "Can we talk? Just for a few minutes?" Keisha glanced at her manager, who was watching them, with narrowed eyes. "My break isn't for another hour." "Then I'll wait." Julian sat at the same booth as before, table 9, and ordered coffee. An hour later, Keisha slid into the booth across from him, her 15-minute break ticking down. "I didn't come because I don't think I can do what you're asking," she said before he could speak. "You want someone with experience, with credentials, with—" "I want someone who sees what others miss," Julian interrupted. "And that's you. But I understand if you're scared." "I'm not scared." "Yes, you are. You're terrified that you'll fail, that you'll prove all your doubts about yourself, right? That you'll waste my time and your opportunity." He leaned forward. "But Keisha, fear of failure isn't a reason not to try. It's a sign that what you're attempting actually matters." Keisha opened her mouth, then closed it. He wasn't wrong. "Look," Julian continued, "I've spent the last 4 days thinking about what you said, about emotional spending and advisors who don't challenge me. And I realized you were describing exactly what's been happening at my company for years. I've been so focused on growth that I stopped paying attention to fundamentals. I've been so surrounded by people who agree with me that I forgot what it feels like to be challenged." He pulled out his phone and opened a document. "So, I did something. I analyzed my last 12 investments using the criteria you mentioned, real fundamentals versus hype. And you were right. Not mostly right, completely right. The 3 tech companies you flagged, I pulled the detailed financials. They're disasters. One of them is probably going to fold within 6 months." Keisha stared at the phone screen, seeing charts and projections she'd only guessed at. "I've already instructed my team to divest," Julian continued. "We'll take losses, but smaller ones than if we'd held on. And I started looking at the boring sectors you mentioned, logistics, infrastructure, found 2 opportunities that my advisory board had dismissed as not worth our time. They were wrong. The potential returns are better than anything we've invested in this year." "You did all that in 4 days?" "I did all that because you showed me I'd been blind. And now I need you to help me see everything else I'm missing." Julian set his phone down. $10,000, Keisha. 1 comprehensive analysis. If you're right, if your assessment is as accurate as I think it will be, then we'll talk about something more permanent. If you're wrong, you still walk away with $10,000 for a few days of work." Keisha's mind raced. $10,000 would cover 3 months of her mother's medication, would get them ahead on rent, would mean she could finally replace the laptop that was barely functioning, the one she needed for school. But more than that, and this was the part that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure, this was a chance to actually use her skills, to do what she'd been training for, studying for, dreaming about, to prove that she belonged in this world, not just to Julian, but to herself. "I'd need time," she said finally. "I can't just quit my jobs. I have responsibilities." "Do the analysis on your own schedule. Nights, weekends, whenever you have time. I'll give you access to everything digitally. You can work from anywhere. And if I say yes, what exactly are you expecting?" "A complete financial audit, investment portfolio analysis, operational efficiency review, strategic recommendations. Basically, tell me everything that's wrong and how to fix it." Julian smiled slightly. "No pressure. That's at least 40 hours of work for $10,000. That's like $250 an hour. That's less than I pay my advisors who've been getting everything wrong." Keisha's break was almost over. She could see her manager gesturing from across the diner. She had to make a decision. She thought about her father, about what he would say if he were here. Marcus Williams, who'd always believed his daughter was capable of extraordinary things, who died trying to give her opportunities he never had. "Okay," Keisha said. "I'll do it." "Yeah?" Julian's face lit up. "Yeah, but I need it in writing. Contract, payment terms, everything official." "Of course. I'll have my lawyer draw up a consulting agreement today. You'll have it by Monday." "And one more thing." Keisha met his eyes directly. "If I do this, I need you to promise you'll actually listen to what I find, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it means admitting you were wrong, because I'm not wasting my time just to tell you things you'll ignore. I promise, that's why I'm hiring you." Keisha stood up. Her break was over, and her manager was actively glaring now. "I need to get back to work." "Of course." Julian stood too. "Thank you, Keisha, for taking a chance on this." "You're the one taking a chance on me." "No," Julian said. "I'm taking a chance on excellence that everyone else was too blind to see. There's a difference." After he left, Keisha went back to work in a daze. She served coffee and took orders and cleared tables, but her mind was elsewhere, already thinking about financial statements and portfolio analysis and the opportunity that had just landed in her lap. That evening, she told her mother about it. Gloria Williams sat in her worn armchair, oxygen tube in her nose, and listened to her daughter explain how a billionaire had offered her $10,000 to analyze his company. When Keisha finished, Gloria was quiet for a long moment. "You scared?" she finally asked. "Terrified." "Good. Your daddy used to say, being scared means you're doing something that matters." Gloria smiled. "You're going to be brilliant, baby. This is what you were made for." "What if I mess up?" "Then you mess up. But at least you tried. At least you didn't let fear keep you small." Gloria reached out and took her daughter's hand. "Your whole life, people have underestimated you because of where you came from, what you look like. Now, you got a chance to show them what you really are. Don't waste it." Keisha squeezed her mother's hand, tears threatening. "I'm doing this for you, for Dad, for all the sacrifices you made." "No, baby, you're doing this for you. We just get to be proud of you while you do it." The contract arrived Monday morning via email. It was straightforward. Keisha would provide a comprehensive analysis of Ward Capital's financial position and strategic direction to be delivered within 2 weeks. Payment of $10,000 upon completion. Either party could terminate with written notice. Keisha signed it electronically, her hand shaking slightly as she clicked the final button. Then Julian sent her the access codes. That evening, after her diner shift and before her coffee shop shift, Keisha sat in the public library with her dying laptop and began to dig into Ward Capital's financials. Julian had given her access to everything: balance sheets, investment portfolios, operational budgets, organizational charts, advisor contracts. It was a treasure trove of data, and the more Keisha looked, the more problems she saw. Over the next 2 weeks, Keisha barely slept. She worked her regular shifts, attended her classes, took care of her mother, and spent every spare moment analyzing Ward Capital. She created spreadsheets tracking investment performance. She built financial models projecting different scenarios. She identified inefficiencies, redundancies, and expenses that generated no value. And she found something she hadn't expected: evidence that some of Julian's advisors were actively steering him toward investments they had financial interests in. Nothing illegal, but ethically murky. Conflicts of interest that should have been disclosed, but weren't. By the end of 2 weeks, Keisha had a 40-page report. It was brutal, comprehensive, and utterly accurate. She sent it to Julian on a Friday evening with a simple email. "Here's what you paid for. Hope you're ready for the truth." Then she went to work her coffee shop shift, trying not to think about how Julian might react. Would he be angry? Would he accuse her of overstepping? Would he refuse to pay because she'd been too harsh? At 9 p.m., her phone rang. "Julian, I just finished reading your report," he said, without preamble. Keisha's stomach dropped. And it's the most valuable document anyone's given me in 5 years." He laughed, but it sounded slightly strangled. "Keisha, you eviscerated my company. You called out problems I didn't even know existed. You identified conflicts of interest that—" He stopped. "How did you find all of this?" "I read everything you gave me access to, and I followed the money. It's all there if you know what you're looking for." "No one else found this. I have a team of analysts. Your team of analysts are protecting themselves and each other. I don't work for them. I don't owe them anything, so I could see what they couldn't, or wouldn't." Julian was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can you come to my office Monday morning, 9 a.m.? I want you to present this to my board." Keisha's heart stuttered. "Present it? To your board?" "Yes, in person. They need to hear this directly from you." "Julian, I'm a waitress. They're not going to listen to me." "You're not a waitress. You're the financial analyst who just diagnosed my company better than anyone I've ever hired. And they're going to listen because I'm making them listen. I don't have anything to wear to a boardroom. Then I'll send you money for a suit. Or don't, show up in jeans if you want. I don't care what you wear. I care what you know." Keisha closed her eyes. This was happening. This was really happening. "Okay, Monday, 9 a.m. Thank you. And Keisha, your $10,000 is being transferred right now. You earned every penny." After they hung up, Keisha sat in the back room of the coffee shop, surrounded by bags of beans and cleaning supplies, and tried to process what had just happened. She'd been paid $10,000. She was presenting to a boardroom full of executives on Monday. Her life was about to change in ways she couldn't begin to predict, and she was absolutely terrified. That weekend, Keisha bought a suit. Not expensive, she found one at a discount store that fit well enough, but professional. She practiced her presentation in her bathroom mirror, trying to sound confident instead of scared. She anticipated every question they might ask, every objection they might raise. Gloria watched her daughter prepare and smiled. "You look like someone who belongs in that boardroom." "I don't belong there, Mama. I'm faking it." "Baby, everyone in that boardroom is faking it. The difference is, you actually know what you're talking about." Monday morning arrived. Keisha left her apartment at 7, giving herself extra time in case anything went wrong. She took the subway to Midtown, emerged into the canyon of skyscrapers, and found the building that housed Ward Capital. The lobby was marble and glass and intimidation. Keisha gave her name to security, received a visitor badge, and took the elevator to the 42nd floor. The receptionist was expecting her. "Ms. Williams, Mr. Ward is waiting for you. Conference room B." Keisha followed the woman down a hallway lined with expensive art and awards. Through glass walls, she could see busy offices, people in expensive clothes doing important work. She'd never felt more out of place. The conference room was enormous, a table that could seat 30 people, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, and at the table, 20 executives in suits that probably cost more than Keisha's entire wardrobe. They all turned when she entered. She felt their eyes assess her. Young, black, female, clearly not one of them. She saw the skepticism, the dismissiveness, the assumption that she didn't belong here. Julian stood at the head of the table. "Gentlemen, this is Keisha Williams, the consultant I told you about." The waitress, one of them, Richard, according to his nameplate, said it like it was a slur. "The financial analyst," Julian corrected coldly, "who's about to tell you exactly what's wrong with this company, and you're going to listen." He gestured to Keisha. "The floor is yours." Keisha walked to the front of the room, her laptop in hand, and connected it to the presentation screen. Her hands were shaking. Her mouth was dry. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she thought about her father, about Gloria, about every person who'd ever been dismissed because they didn't fit someone's narrow definition of expertise. She clicked to the first slide. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "the reason Ward Capital has lost $47 million in the last 6 months isn't market volatility. It's incompetence masked as strategy." The room erupted. Richard leaned forward aggressively. "Ms. Williams, with all due respect—" "Let her finish," Julian said quietly, but the authority in his voice was absolute. Keisha didn't give them time to argue. She clicked to the next slide, showing a breakdown of their recent investments. "You've invested heavily in 3 tech startups that anyone with basic due diligence would have flagged as overvalued. You ignored the fundamentals because the founders went to the right schools and said the right things at the right cocktail parties." She clicked again. "Here's the data. Customer acquisition costs 3 times higher than revenue per customer. Burn rates that guarantee insolvency within 12 months. No path to profitability. But you invested anyway because these companies had buzz." Another executive, Thomas, interrupted. "Those investments were vetted by our entire analysis team." "Then your entire analysis team is either incompetent or afraid to tell you the truth," Keisha said. "Probably both." The room exploded into protests. Julian held up a hand for silence. Keisha continued, clicking through slides. She showed them operational inefficiencies, showed them redundant positions that existed only to protect executive territories, showed them advisor contracts that paid enormous fees for minimal value, and then she showed them the conflicts of interest. 3 of your senior advisors have financial stakes in companies they recommended you invest in," Keisha said. "They didn't disclose these conflicts. And Ward Capital lost money on all 3 investments, while the advisors' personal positions appreciated." The silence that followed was deafening. "That's a serious accusation," Richard said, his voice tight. "It's a documented fact." Keisha clicked to show the evidence: public filings, investment records, timeline correlations. "It's all here. You can verify every detail." She spent the next 90 minutes walking them through every problem she'd identified. The room's hostility gradually transformed into something else: reluctant respect, grudging acknowledgement, and in some cases, visible discomfort from the people she'd called out. When she finished, she closed her laptop and faced them directly. "You asked for financial advice. I gave it to you. Now you can either listen or you can keep doing what you've been doing. But if you choose the latter, Ward Capital will be irrelevant within 3 years." Julian stood. "Thank you, Keisha. That was extraordinary." He turned to the board. "This meeting is over. I want recommendations on my desk by Friday for how we implement Ms. Williams' suggestions. Anyone who has a problem with that can submit their resignation instead." The executives filed out, some whispering to each other, others looking shell-shocked. Richard lingered, his expression dark, but Julian met his gaze steadily until the older man left. Finally, only Julian and Keisha remained. "You okay?" Julian asked. Keisha sank into a chair, adrenaline finally ebbing. "I think I just made a lot of enemies." "You made one friend," Julian said, "and he controls the company. They're never going to accept me." "They don't have to accept you. They just have to acknowledge that you're right." He sat beside her. "Keisha, that was one of the most impressive things I've ever witnessed. You stood in front of 20 hostile executives and didn't flinch. I was terrified." "That makes it even more impressive." Julian hesitated. "I have a question. Actually, more of a proposal." "Another one?" "I want to hire you. Not as a consultant, as a permanent employee, chief financial strategist. You'd work directly with me to overhaul Ward Capital's entire approach. Salary, benefits, everything official." Keisha stared at him. "You're offering me a job based on one presentation, based on the most accurate financial analysis I've ever received, based on watching you stand up to a room full of powerful men and not back down, based on seeing potential that everyone else was too blind to recognize. Julian, I don't even have a degree yet. I don't care about degrees, I care about results, and you just delivered results that my team of MBAs couldn't. What would the salary be?" Julian named a number that made Keisha's vision blur. It was more than she made in a year, at both her jobs combined. It was enough to cover her mother's medical bills, finish school, stop living paycheck to paycheck. It was life-changing. "I need to think about it," she said, though her heart was screaming yes. "Take the time you need. But Keisha, I hope you say yes, because I think we could do something extraordinary together." That evening, Keisha sat with her mother and explained the offer. Gloria listened, tears streaming down her face. "You're going to take it," she said. "Not a question." "I'm scared, Mama." "Good. That means it matters." Gloria grabbed her daughter's hands. "Baby, this is what your daddy worked for, what I've prayed for. A chance for you to show the world what you can do. Don't let fear steal that from you." Keisha called Julian that night. "I'll take the job, but I have conditions." "Name them." "I finish my degree, Ward Capital pays for it, and I get time to attend classes." "Done." "And I want it in my contract that I can speak honestly. No sugarcoating, no political games. You hired me to tell you the truth. And I need protection to keep doing that, even when it's uncomfortable." "Absolutely. Anything else?" "Yeah. I start in 2 weeks. I need to give proper notice at my jobs." Julian agreed to everything. The contract arrived the next day, and Keisha signed it with shaking hands. 2 weeks later, she walked into Ward Capital as an employee. She had her own office, her own team, and access to everything she needed to do her job. And she got to work. Over the next 3 months, Keisha systematically restructured Ward Capital. She cut the losing investments. She renegotiated vendor contracts, saving millions. She reorganized the analysis team, firing the incompetent and elevating the talented. She implemented new due diligence procedures that focused on fundamentals over hype. And it worked. Ward Capital's losses stopped, then reversed. Within 6 months, the company was profitable again. Within a year, they'd recovered everything they'd lost, and then some. The business media noticed. Articles appeared. How Ward Capital turned around its fortunes. The analyst who saved a billion-dollar firm. From Waitress to Wall Street, Keisha Williams' unlikely rise. Some coverage was positive, some was skeptical, and some was openly hostile, questioning her qualifications, suggesting she'd slept her way to the position, calling her a diversity hire. Keisha read every article and used the criticism as fuel. Every time someone doubted her, she worked harder. Every time someone dismissed her, she proved them wrong with results. And gradually, even the skeptics had to acknowledge the truth. Keisha Williams was brilliant, but success brought new complications. Working closely with Julian, Keisha had gotten to know him not just as a boss, but as a person. She'd seen his vulnerability when strategies failed, his integrity when making difficult decisions, his loyalty to employees who deserved it, his sense of humor during long strategy sessions. And somewhere along the way, though she tried to fight it, she'd started to have feelings for him. It was unprofessional, inappropriate, a cliché she'd promised herself she'd never fall into. The employee falling for the boss. But Julian was different than she'd expected. He wasn't the entitled billionaire she'd assumed. He was thoughtful, surprisingly humble about his own limitations, genuinely interested in her ideas. He treated her as an equal, not an underling. And from the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't paying attention, she suspected he felt it too. They never acted on it. They maintained strict professionalism, but the tension was there, humming beneath every interaction. One evening, working late on a particularly complex acquisition analysis, they ordered dinner to the office. Julian had loosened his tie. Keisha had kicked off her heels. They sat on the floor of his office, surrounded by papers and Chinese food containers, and for a moment, it felt less like work and more like something else. "Can I ask you something personal?" Julian said. Keisha looked up. "Okay. Do you ever regret it? Taking this job? Sometimes I worry I pulled you into a world that's made your life harder." "Harder how?" "The scrutiny, the criticism, the constant pressure to prove yourself because people can't accept that you earned this." Keisha considered the question. Every day is hard, but every day at the diner was hard too. The difference is, now I'm building something. Now I'm using my brain instead of just surviving. So no, I don't regret it. Even when people say terrible things about you, let them talk. My results speak louder than their gossip. Julian smiled. "You're extraordinary. Do you know that?" Something in his tone made Keisha's heart skip. "Julian, I know we can't. The power dynamic, the optics, everything." He ran a hand through his hair. "But I need you to know that you're the best thing that's happened to this company. And to me." Keisha's breath caught. "To you?" "To me," he confirmed quietly. "You challenged me, made me better, made me remember why I started this company in the first place. Julian, we worked together. This can't—" "I know. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know." They looked at each other across the scattered papers and takeout containers, and the air felt heavy with everything they weren't saying. "We should focus on the acquisition," Keisha said finally, though her voice was unsteady. "Right, the acquisition." But something had shifted. They both felt it. 1 year after Keisha joined Ward Capital, Julian called an all-hands meeting. The entire company gathered in the main conference hall, over 200 employees. Julian stood at the front, Keisha beside him. "1 year ago," Julian began, "I made one of the best decisions of my career. I hired someone who didn't fit our typical profile. Someone without an MBA or Wall Street experience, someone most of you initially doubted." He gestured to Keisha. "Keisha Williams has transformed this company. She identified problems we'd been ignoring. She implemented solutions that saved us millions. She built a strategic framework that's positioned us for the next decade of growth. The room applauded. Some enthusiastically, some politely, but everyone clapped. And now, Julian continued, I'm promoting her to Chief Operating Officer. The applause grew louder. Keisha felt her eyes burn with tears she refused to let fall. After the meeting, executives congratulated her. Even Richard, who'd been so hostile initially, shook her hand. You've earned this, he said grudgingly. I was wrong about you. That evening, as Keisha was packing up to leave, Julian appeared in her office doorway. Congratulations, COO. Thank you. Though I'm terrified I'll screw it up. You won't. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Keisha, there's something I need to tell you. Her heart raced. Okay. I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations, staying on as chairman, but bringing in a new CEO, someone from outside the company. Why? Because I realized something. The reason I've been reluctant to pursue what I feel for you is the power dynamic. The fact that you report to me, that your career depends on me. He met her eyes directly. But if I'm not your boss anymore, if you're reporting to someone else, then that dynamic changes. Keisha's breath caught. Julian, I'm not asking you for anything right now, but I needed you to know that this is happening, that in 2 months, I won't be your superior anymore. And when that day comes, he left the sentence unfinished. When that day comes, Keisha prompted, her voice barely a whisper. I'd like to take you to dinner. A real dinner, not a working dinner or a business meeting. Just us, as two people who enjoy each other's company. Keisha should have said no, should have maintained professional distance, should have protected herself from the complications that would inevitably follow. But she'd been fighting what she felt for over a year, and she was tired of pretending. Okay, she said. When that day comes, I'd like that too. Julian's face lit up with a smile that made him look years younger. Yeah? Yeah. 2 months later, Julian Ward stepped down as CEO of Ward Capital. He remained chairman of the board, a position that allowed him to guide strategy without managing daily operations. The new CEO was a woman named Patricia Chen, brilliant, experienced, and someone Keisha respected immediately. 3 days after the transition was complete, Julian showed up at Keisha's office with a simple question. Are you free Saturday night? Keisha smiled. I could be. Then I'm taking you to dinner. Wear whatever you want. No business talk allowed. What will we talk about? Everything except work. Saturday arrived. Julian picked Keisha up from her apartment, the much nicer apartment she could now afford, where her mother had her own room and no one had to worry about eviction notices. Gloria met Julian at the door, sized him up with a mother's expert eye, and said, You hurt my daughter. I don't care how much money you have. I wouldn't dream of it, Mrs. Williams. Good. Now go have fun. Julian took Keisha to a restaurant that wasn't trying to impress anyone, a small Italian place in Brooklyn that served incredible food and didn't care about celebrity sightings. They sat in a corner booth, and for the first time in over a year, they talked as just two people. Tell me about your father, Julian said. So Keisha did. She talked about Marcus Williams, about the bus driver who'd worked himself to death, trying to give his daughter opportunities, about the lessons he'd taught her, about how much she missed him. He'd be proud of you, Julian said. I hope so. I know so. Keisha, you've accomplished something extraordinary. You went from serving coffee to running operations at a billion-dollar firm. That's not luck. That's brilliance and hard work. I couldn't have done it without you taking a chance on me. I didn't take a chance. I recognized something everyone else missed. He reached across the table and took her hand. But I want you to know, what I feel for you has nothing to do with your work. Yes, I admire your brilliance, but I'm sitting here with you because you make me laugh, because you challenge me, because you see me as a person, not a position, because when you walk into a room, everything gets brighter. Keisha felt tears threatening. Julian, I'm in love with you, he said simply. I have been for months, and I needed to tell you, even if you don't feel the same way. I feel the same way, Keisha whispered. I've been trying not to, but I do. Julian smiled, and this time, without the barrier of work between them, he leaned across the table and kissed her. It was their first kiss, soft, tentative, perfect. When they pulled apart, Keisha laughed. People are going to talk. Let them. I don't care anymore. The media will say I slept my way to COO. Your results will speak louder than their gossip. They always have. And he was right. When their relationship became public, slowly, carefully, with deliberate transparency, there was gossip. There were think pieces about power dynamics and workplace romances. There were skeptics who claimed Keisha's success was now tainted. But there were also the numbers. Ward Capital's performance under Keisha's leadership was undeniable. The strategic decisions she'd made, the culture changes she'd implemented, the profits that had quintupled, and gradually, even the critics had to acknowledge the truth. Keisha Williams had earned every accolade, every promotion, every success. Her relationship with Julian didn't diminish that. If anything, it made her work harder to prove that her merit stood independent of her personal life. 2 years after that first dinner, Julian proposed, not in some grand gesture, but on a Tuesday evening in Keisha's apartment, with Gloria dozing in her chair and a half-finished financial report spread across the coffee table. "Marry me," he said, simple and direct. "You couldn't pick a more romantic moment," Keisha teased. "Why? This is us, work and family and Chinese takeout. I don't want romance. I want real life with you." Keisha looked at this man who'd seen her brilliance when she was invisible to everyone else, who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd fallen in love with her mind before her beauty, her character before her position. "Yes," she said. "Obviously, yes." They got married 6 months later. In a small ceremony, Gloria cried through the entire thing. Ward Capital's entire executive team attended, and even Richard gave a toast about how Keisha had proven him wrong about everything. But the moment Keisha remembered most was standing at Mel's diner 3 days before the wedding. She'd insisted they go back, she and Julian together, to the place where everything started. They sat at table 9, the same booth where Julian had jokingly asked for financial advice and gotten a response that changed both their lives. Rosa, who'd been promoted to general manager, served them personally. "Look at you two," she said, with a wide smile. "From waitress and customer to power couple. Like a fairy tale." "Not a fairy tale," Keisha corrected. "Just two people who were brave enough to see each other." After Rosa left, Julian took Keisha's hand across the table. "Do you ever think about that morning? What would have happened if you just laughed off my question?" "Every day," Keisha said. "I think about how close I came to not answering, to just taking your order and moving on." "What made you answer?" "Honestly, I was annoyed. You asked like it was a joke, like there was no way a waitress could possibly know anything about finance. And something in me wanted to prove you wrong. Julian laughed. Best decision you ever made. Second best, Keisha corrected. The best decision was saying yes when you offered me the job. No. The best decision was being brave enough to believe you deserved it. They finished their breakfast, paid their bill with a tip that was probably larger than Rosa's weekly salary, and left the diner hand in hand. Outside, Keisha paused and looked back through the window. She could see her past in there. The woman who'd been invisible, struggling, serving people who never saw her potential. And she could see her future walking beside her. Julian, yes, but more than that. The life she'd built through her own brilliance. The respect she'd earned. The barriers she'd broken. You okay? Julian asked. Yeah, Keisha smiled. Just thinking about how far we've come. We've come far, but I think we're just getting started. He was right, because 5 years after that first encounter, Keisha Williams was one of the most respected financial strategists in the country. She spoke at conferences. She'd been featured on the cover of business magazines. She'd written a book about strategic thinking that became required reading at business schools. And she'd never forgotten where she came from. Ward Capital, under her influence, had implemented a revolutionary hiring program. They recruited from community colleges, from service industries, from places where brilliant minds were trapped by circumstance. They offered mentorship, education assistance, and opportunities to people who'd been overlooked their entire lives. We're looking for the next Keisha Williams, Julian explained to the board when they'd initially resisted the program. The next Keisha Williams is 1 in a million, Richard had argued. No, Keisha had corrected. There are thousands of people like me. You just have to be willing to look for them in places you'd normally dismiss. She'd been right. The program had discovered extraordinary talent. Analysts who saw patterns others missed. Strategists who thought differently because they'd lived differently. Innovators who brought perspectives the company desperately needed. Ward Capital became known not just for its profits, but for its culture. For being a place where merit mattered more than credentials, where diversity wasn't a checkbox, but a strategic advantage. And at the center of it all was Keisha Williams, the woman who'd gone from serving pancakes to serving on the board of directors. 7 years after that Tuesday morning at Mel's Diner, Keisha returned one more time. Not for breakfast this time, but for an announcement. She'd bought the diner. Rosa stood beside her, tears streaming down her face, as Keisha explained her plan. She was turning Mel's Diner into a training ground. Waitstaff would receive financial literacy classes. They'd learn about investing, budgeting, strategic thinking, and the best of them would be offered internships at Ward Capital. Because I was a waitress, Keisha told the assembled staff, and someone saw past that. Someone recognized that brilliance exists everywhere. Now I'm going to make sure others get the same chance I did. The program launched that fall. Within 3 years, 12 former diner employees had transitioned to careers in finance. None of them had traditional qualifications. All of them had something more important: hunger, intelligence, and the refusal to let circumstance define their potential. And every year, on the anniversary of that first conversation, Keisha and Julian returned to Mel's Diner. They sat at table 9, ordered the breakfast special, and remembered the moment when a joke became an opportunity, when dismissiveness became recognition, when a billionaire and a waitress both learned that brilliance comes in forms you don't expect, if you're brave enough to look for it. What do you think about when you sit here? Julian asked one year, stirring his coffee. Keisha thought about it. I think about the woman I was, scared, struggling, sure the world would never see her. And I think about how one conversation changed everything. How being brave for 3 minutes opened doors I didn't know existed. And what do you want people to learn from your story? That the person you're dismissing might be the one who saves you. That credentials don't equal capability. That if you're only looking for excellence in expected places, you're missing most of it. She smiled. And that when someone asks for your advice, even as a joke, you should give it. You never know what might happen. Julian raised his coffee cup. To unexpected brilliance. To being brave enough to see it, Keisha added. They clinked cups across the booth, where everything had started. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something extraordinary together. Because sometimes the most important person you'll ever meet is serving your coffee. Sometimes the answer you need is standing right in front of you, holding a notepad and waiting to take your order. Sometimes brilliance wears an apron and struggles to pay rent and dreams of a future everyone tells them is impossible. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very willing to look beyond your assumptions, you'll be smart enough to recognize it. Keisha Williams had been that brilliance. Julian Ward had been smart enough to see it. And together, they'd built a legacy that proved a simple truth. Excellence exists everywhere. You just have to be willing to recognize it, especially when it comes from the places you'd normally overlook. If this story moved you, here's what I want you to do. Not for me, not for the algorithm, but for the world we're all trying to build. Tomorrow, look at the people you might normally dismiss. The person serving your coffee, the janitor in your building, the cashier at the grocery store. Actually see them, because one of them might be brilliant. One of them might have the answer you've been looking for. One of them might change your life, if you're willing to pay attention. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in recognizing brilliance wherever it exists. Drop a comment and tell me about a time you were underestimated, or a time you saw potential others missed. And remember, the next Keisha Williams might be right in front of you. You just have to be brave enough to see her. Thanks for being here. Now go find the brilliance the world's been overlooking.